Get off the line, old man.
We don't have time for your nonsense. The voice on the phone was sharp, dripping with impatience, slicing through the quiet of James Carver's small living room like a knife. The young tech support agent's words echoed in the cramped space, where the faint hum of an old radiator battled the chill seeping through the windowpanes. Outside, the gray Indiana sky hung low, heavy with the promise of snow, while inside the air was thick with the musty scent of well-worn furniture and the lingering aroma of black coffee from a chipped mug on the table. James, a 78-year-old Vietnam veteran with hands that still trembled slightly from years of carrying a rifle, sat hunched in his faded recliner, the phone pressed to his ear. His weathered face, etched with lines from battles fought decades ago, froze in disbelief. The words stung, not just for their cruelty but for their casual dismissal of a man who'd once run through jungles under gunfire to save his squad. He'd called the phone company to dispute a $300 bill he couldn't afford, a bill for services he hadn't used, tacked onto his account after a system error. He'd been polite, patient, explaining his situation: a fixed pension, a modest home, and a life carefully budgeted to the penny. But the agent, hidden behind a headset in some distant call center, didn't care. The line went dead with a click, leaving James staring at the receiver, his chest tight with a mix of shock and humiliation. He set the phone down slowly, his fingers brushing against a small, tarnished dog tag on the table, a relic from his service, inscribed with the name of his best friend Tommy, who hadn't made it home. The cold metal grounded him, but only for a moment. His heart pounded not from fear but from a quiet, burning anger. He'd faced worse than a rude kid on a phone line. Mortars, ambushes, the screams of the wounded, but this felt different. This was his own country, his own people, treating him like he was nothing. He leaned back, the recliner creaking under his weight, and closed his eyes, the agent's words replaying in his mind like a bad radio loop. The room was a museum of his life, a folded American flag in a glass case on the mantel, earned for his service. A yellowed photo of him and Tommy grinning in their uniforms, pinned to a corkboard. A stack of unpaid bills tucked under a paperweight shaped like a miniature M16. The radiator clanked, and a gust rattled the window, pulling James back to the present. He stood, his knees protesting, and shuffled to the kitchen to refill his coffee. As the pot gurgled, he glanced at the calendar on the wall, marked with red ink for doctor's appointments and a circled date for his next VA check. That check wouldn't cover the phone bill, not with his meds and groceries already stretching it thin. He returned to his recliner, coffee in hand, and picked up the dog tag again, rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger. Tommy's voice echoed in his memory. "Keep moving, Carver. Don't let him pin you down." James had always listened to Tommy even after he was gone. He wasn't about to let some call center kid pin him down either. He reached for the phone again, dialing the company's number with deliberate presses of the buttons, his jaw set. This time, he got a different agent, a woman with a clipped, professional tone who sounded no older than his granddaughter. He explained the bill again, his voice steady but firm, recounting his service, his pension, his need for the phone to stay connected to his doctor and his sister in Ohio. Halfway through his story, the line crackled, and the agent interrupted. "Sir, I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do. You'll need to pay the balance or face disconnection." Her voice wasn't cruel, but it was cold, procedural, like she was reading from a script. James's grip tightened on the phone. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, "I served this country for 3 years in places you can't imagine. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for what's right." Silence stretched on the line, broken only by the faint tapping of a keyboard. Then another click. The call dropped again. James slammed the receiver down, the sound sharp in the quiet room. His breath came in short bursts, and for a moment he felt the jungle heat on his skin, the weight of his pack, the panic of an ambush. He shook his head, forcing himself back to the present. The dog tag was still in his hand, now warm from his grip. He slipped it into his pocket, a small act of defiance, and stood, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't done fighting, not yet. He grabbed his coat, a worn olive green jacket with a faded 101st Airborne patch on the sleeve, and headed out the door. The cold bit at his face as he stepped onto the porch, the wind carrying the distant rumble of traffic from the main road. His neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, was shoveling her walkway, her scarf flapping in the breeze. She waved, but James only nodded, his mind elsewhere. He climbed into his rusty pickup truck, the engine coughing to life after a few tries, and drove toward the phone company's local office downtown. The radio played a staticky country song, but he barely heard it, his thoughts consumed by the injustice of it all. At a red light, he glanced at the passenger seat, where a folded newspaper lay with a headline about a local veterans' charity event. He'd been there last week, helping serve meals to younger vets struggling to adjust. One of them, a kid named Marcus who'd lost a leg in Afghanistan, had thanked him with a handshake that lingered, eyes full of respect. That memory clashed with the phone company's dismissal, fueling James's resolve. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for every vet who'd been brushed aside, forgotten, or worse. The phone company's office was a squat, glass-fronted building in a strip mall, its sign flickering in the overcast light. James parked and stepped inside, the warmth of the lobby hitting him like a wall. A young receptionist glanced up from her computer, her smile faltering as she took in his age and his patched jacket. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone polite but wary. James squared his shoulders, the dog tag heavy in his pocket, and said, "I need to speak to someone about my bill, and I'm not leaving until I do." The receptionist hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Behind her, a few employees milled about, their voices a low hum. One of them, a man in a cheap suit with a manager's badge, looked over and frowned. James felt their eyes on him, sizing him up, dismissing him already. The air grew heavy, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He stood his ground, his voice steady as he repeated, "I'm not leaving." To keep reading, don't miss what happens next. This story's just getting started, and the tension's about to skyrocket. Stay with it to see how James faces even greater challenges and fights for what's right. James Carver stood in the fluorescent-lit lobby of the phone company's office, his boots planted firmly on the worn linoleum floor. The air smelled of cheap air freshener and stale coffee, and the hum of a copier in the corner mixed with the low chatter of employees. His olive-green jacket, with its faded 101st Airborne patch, hung loose on his frame, but his posture was rigid, unyielding. The dog tag in his pocket pressed against his thigh, a quiet reminder of Tommy's voice. "Keep moving, Carver." He wasn't about to back down, not after being hung up on twice and dismissed like yesterday's news. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight bun and a name tag reading Kayla, shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. Her eyes darted to the manager, the man in the cheap suit who'd been watching James since he walked in. The manager, his badge read Derek, strode over, his polished shoes clicking with purpose. He was in his 30s with a slick haircut and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sir, if you're here about a billing issue, you'll need to call our support line," Derek said, his voice smooth but edged with condescension. "We don't handle disputes in person." James's jaw tightened. "I tried that. Twice. Your people hung up on me." His words were measured, but each one carried the weight of his frustration. He pulled a crumpled bill from his pocket and slid it across the counter. "This says I owe $300 for services I didn't use. I'm on a pension. I can't pay this, and I shouldn't have to." Derek glanced at the bill, barely touching it, as if it might dirty his hands. "Our system doesn't make mistakes, sir. If the bill's there, it's valid." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "Maybe you signed up for something and forgot. Happens a lot with folks your age." The pause was deliberate, the words a jab. Kayla looked down at her keyboard, her fingers frozen, while a few customers in the waiting area shifted in their seats, their murmurs growing quieter. James felt the heat rise in his chest, a familiar burn from years of facing down arrogance, enemy soldiers, cocky lieutenants, and now this corporate suit. He leaned in, his voice low but steady. "Son, I was dodging bullets in Vietnam while you were still in diapers. I don't forget things, and I don't take kindly to being brushed off." His eyes locked onto Derek's, and for a moment the manager faltered, his smirk slipping. But Derek recovered quickly, straightening up. "Look, mister." He glanced at the bill. "Carver, I get it, you're upset. But there's a process. Fill out a form online, and we'll review it in a few weeks." He gestured toward the door, his tone final. "Now I've got other customers to help." James didn't budge. The lobby felt smaller now, the air thicker. A woman in the waiting area, clutching a phone with a cracked screen, whispered to her neighbor, "He's a vet. They shouldn't treat him like that." Her words were soft but carried, and a few heads nodded. James didn't hear them. His focus was on Derek, who was already turning away, dismissing him again. "I'm not filling out a form," James said, his voice rising just enough to draw eyes. "I'm here now. Fix this." Derek spun back, his face hardening. "Sir, you're causing a scene. If you don't leave, I'll have to call security." He reached for a phone on the counter, his movements sharp, theatrical. The threat hung in the air, and James felt it like a physical blow. His hands clenched, the dog tag in his pocket digging into his palm. He'd faced worse, far worse, but the idea of being escorted out like some troublemaker made his stomach churn. He thought of Tommy, of the promises they'd made to each other in the jungle, to never let the other be humiliated, to always stand tall. Before James could respond, the lobby door swung open and a gust of cold air swept in. A young man in a delivery uniform, his cap pulled low, stepped inside holding a stack of packages. He glanced at the tense standoff, then at James's jacket, and his eyes widened slightly. "Hey, you're that vet from the charity dinner last week, right?" he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "You helped my buddy Marcus. Said you were a hero. The words cut through the tension like a flare. Derek froze, the phone halfway to his ear. The woman in the waiting area sat up straighter, her whisper now a murmur of agreement. Yeah, I saw him there too, she said, her voice bolder. He was serving food to those young guys. Another customer, an older man with a cane, nodded. Damn shame treating a vet like this. James felt a flicker of warmth in his chest, but it was quickly overshadowed by Derek's scoff. This isn't about his service, the manager snapped, his voice sharp enough to silence the room. This is about policy, and he's disrupting our business. He dialed the phone, muttering something about security. James's heart sank, but he stood taller, his hand brushing the dog tag in his pocket. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He felt the weight of every vet who'd been ignored, every soldier who'd come home to a country that didn't care. The lobby grew quiet again, save for the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights and the distant wail of a siren outside. James's mind flashed to a moment in Vietnam. A night under a starless sky, pinned down by enemy fire, Tommy's hand on his shoulder urging him to keep going. He'd survived that. He'd survived this. But the humiliation burned, a slow fire in his gut. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the delivery guy stepped forward, his voice loud and clear. Man, this ain't right. You're gonna call security on a vet over a bill? What's wrong with you? The crowd stirred again, their murmurs growing into a low rumble of disapproval. Derek's face reddened, but he didn't back down. Stay out of this, he hissed at the delivery guy, then spoke into the phone. Yeah, we need security in the lobby. Now. James's eyes narrowed, his resolve hardening. He wasn't leaving, not until this was settled. But as the seconds ticked by, the weight of the situation pressed harder. The crowd's support was a lifeline, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Outside, the siren grew louder, and through the glass doors, James caught a glimpse of flashing lights pulling into the parking lot. His heart skipped a beat. Was this really happening? Was he about to be dragged out of here? A 78-year-old veteran for demanding what was right? He gripped the dog tag tighter, Tommy's voice echoing in his mind. Don't let him pin you down. We're on the edge of something big here. The tension's boiling over, and what happens next will flip everything upside down. Stick around. You won't want to miss how this showdown unfolds. The phone company's lobby felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension as James Carver stood his ground. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the linoleum floor, while the faint smell of burnt coffee from a break room somewhere lingered. Outside, red and blue lights flashed through the glass doors, painting the room in pulses of color. James's hand rested in his pocket, fingers wrapped around Tommy's dog tag, its edges worn smooth from years of touch. The crowd, customers, a delivery guy, an older man with a cane, watched in hushed anticipation, their murmurs a low hum of support. Derek, the manager, stood behind the counter, phone still in hand, his smug expression faltering as the reality of his call for security sank in. The glass doors burst open, and 2 security guards stepped inside, their boots heavy on the floor. The taller one, a broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut, scanned the room, his hand resting on a radio clipped to his belt. Who's causing the trouble? He barked, his voice cutting through the silence. Derek pointed at James, his finger jabbing the air. Him! He's refusing to leave, disrupting our operations. The crowd stirred, the woman with the cracked phone muttering, That's not right, loud enough for the guards to hear. The delivery guy, still clutching his stack of packages, stepped closer to James. He's a vet, man. He's just trying to fix a wrong bill. James's chest tightened, the weight of the moment pressing down like the jungle heat of Vietnam. He could almost hear the distant crack of gunfire, feel the mud under his boots, smell the damp earth. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was his hometown, and he was being treated like an intruder. He straightened, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I'm not causing trouble. I'm asking for what's fair. This company's trying to charge me for something I didn't do, and I won't leave until it's fixed. The taller guard's eyes flicked to James's jacket, catching the faded 101st Airborne patch. His expression softened just for a moment, but he shook his head. Sir, you need to come with us. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. The second guard, younger and wiry, stepped forward, his hand outstretched as if to guide James out. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a ripple of discontent. The older man with the cane banged it on the floor, his voice sharp. You're gonna drag a veteran out over a phone bill? Shame on you! James felt the dog tag in his pocket, warm against his skin, and Tommy's voice echoed in his mind. Keep moving, Carver. Don't let him pin you down. He wasn't going anywhere. He locked eyes with the taller guard, his gaze unwavering. I served 3 years in Vietnam, lost friends, carried men to safety under fire. If you think I'm scared of being escorted out of here, you're wrong. I'm staying until this is right. The room went still, the weight of his words hanging heavy. Even Derek paused, his hand hovering over the counter. The delivery guy nodded, his voice loud in the silence. Damn straight. This man's a hero. You should be helping him, not kicking him out. The woman with the cracked phone stood up, her chair scraping the floor. Fix his bill! Do your job! The crowd's energy shifted, their voices rising in a chorus of support, a tide turning against Derek's cold authority. Before the guards could move, the lobby doors swung open again, this time with a force that made the glass rattle. A woman strode in, her tailored suit crisp against the drab surroundings, her heels clicking with purpose. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a presence that commanded the room. A badge on her blazer read, Eleanor Hayes, Regional Director. Behind her, a small entourage of employees trailed, one clutching a tablet, another scribbling notes. The crowd parted, and even the guards stepped back, sensing the shift in power. Eleanor's gaze swept the room, landing on James. I'm Mr. Carver? She asked, her voice calm but firm. James nodded, surprised she knew his name. She turned to Derek, her expression hardening. Explain why I'm getting calls about a veteran being threatened with security over a billing dispute. Derek stammered, his earlier confidence crumbling. Ma'am, he was causing a disturbance. It's policy. Policy? Eleanor cut him off, her voice like steel. You hung up on a veteran twice, ignored his concerns, and now you're calling security on him? That's not policy. That's a failure. She turned to James, her tone softening. Mr. Carver, I'm sorry. I was just up the street when a customer called our corporate line about this. I checked your account on my way here. The $300 charge was a system error. It's been removed, effective immediately. The crowd erupted in cheers. The woman with the cracked phone clapping, the older man banging his cane in triumph. James felt a weight lift, but the fire in his chest didn't fade. He looked at Eleanor, his voice low but clear. Thank you, ma'am. But this isn't just about me. There are others, vets, seniors, getting pushed around by systems like this. They don't all get a regional director showing up. Eleanor nodded, her eyes meeting his with respect. You're right, and we're going to do better. She turned to Derek, who was now pale, his hands fidgeting. You'll be retrained on customer service protocols. Starting tomorrow. She faced the crowd, raising her voice. This company serves this community, and that includes our veterans. Mr. Carver, your account is clear, and we're crediting you 6 months of free service as an apology. The crowd cheered again, louder this time, and the delivery guy slapped James on the shoulder, grinning. Told you, man. You're a legend. James managed a small smile, his fingers brushing the dog tag. He thought of Tommy, of the men he'd carried through the jungle, of the promises he'd kept. This wasn't just a win for him. It was a stand for every vet who'd been dismissed, forgotten, or worse. Eleanor approached James, extending her hand. He shook it, her grip firm, and she leaned in slightly. My father was a vet, she said quietly. Korea. I know what you've given. Thank you. She handed him a card with her direct line. If you ever need anything, you call me. James nodded, slipping the card into his pocket next to the dog tag. The crowd was still buzzing, some snapping photos, others clapping as Eleanor escorted Derek to a back office, her voice low but stern. As James stepped outside, the cold air hit his face, but it felt different now. Clean, sharp, like a new beginning. The flashing lights of the security vehicle had dimmed, the guards already retreating. He climbed into his pickup, the engine coughing to life, and glanced at the dog tag in his hand. We got this one, Tommy, he whispered. The radio crackled with a country song, and for the first time that day James turned it up, letting the music carry him home.